I'd like to introduce on the screen Rayanne Claxton, who's a PhD student in linguistics at the University of Alberta. Rayanne is participating in and working in language revitalization classes, programming and resource development in her own family language. Sonya Bird, who's with us here, is with the linguistics department at the University of Victoria. She has been working on language revitalization for 2 decades, focusing especially on pronunciation issues. Sonya is also involved in the design and delivery of a master's in Indigenous language revitalization at the University of Victoria. Their talk is entitled Pronunciation in the Context of Culture and Language Revitalization. So I've heard Sonya talk before, and I'm sure that Rayanne is going to make wonderful contributions here. This is an area that's a little bit different from the rest of pronunciation studies, but because of that, it makes us think far more deeply, I think, about a lot of the issues that we work with all the time. So, welcome.
Thank you. And I was trying to turn my computer around so that Rayanne could see you all, but I realized that I couldn't see because I turned my own view off. Can you see Rayanne? The audience, everyone's waving at you. Okay. All right. So thank you everyone for being here. We're going to start just with introducing ourselves here. So as Tracy said, my name is Sonya Bird. I am a settler, not on these lines specifically at this point. I'm German and Welsh and English ancestry. I grew up in Union Territory in Montreal, and now I'm a very grateful settler on the lands of the Leborman and Simshakan speaking people in Greater Victoria. And for my part, I also have a sort of long list of thank yous. Oh, I just realized we have a long list of people we'd like to thank you, our team who have helped us along the way. Elders and they've representation and we've worked quite closely with members of the Hokkien Language and Culture Society and also the students of the Hokkien Language Academy, which is run through Simon Fraser University, thanks to Donna Gertz. And then Maida, Tess, Chloe, Ali, Haruna, Matt, and Julie, research. And I'd also just like to start by thanking Tracy and the organizers for just for being committed and excited about this particular context that Rayanne and I work in. I'm really thankful for that, and also thankful for the opportunity to reflect a little bit, I guess, on the work that we've been doing over the past few years. Often, I'm sure you all know, it's fast-paced and it's hard to just sit back and think about what we're doing in this talk. It's provided me anyway with an opportunity to do that. So I'm grateful for that. And on that, also really grateful to be here with Rayanne. So thank you, Rayanne, also for all of your teachings and sharing with me about your perspectives on the process as well.
Rayanne Claxton from the state, my name is Rayanne Claxton. I'm from Sandwich. My community name is Mayo and Couchin. As was mentioned, I'm a PhD in the University of Alberta and really just working on all aspects of language for language recognition purposes. I'm really happy to be here and the work that I've done with Sonya and on pronunciation has really helped me move forward in my research. everybody that's hopefully a language family that has usually been independent. Without their contributions, make that cut.
All right. What we're hoping to do in this talk is to introduce to you all the special considerations of pronunciation and pronunciation work in the context of Indigenous language revitalization, and also reflect on how the approaches that we use within this particular context can maybe shape more general approaches. Our hope is that you will all get something out of this in your own work as well. So we'll start with a little bit of background on what we know specifically, and also on the context of Indigenous language revitalization, and then talk a little bit about our work on the pronunciation side and also on the perception side, and end with a discussion of the things we have learned in the process of doing this work about how to do the work in a good way. So Halkanitan is a language that's categorized or classified as Coast-Salish by linguists. It's the most widely spoken of the Coast-Salish languages, and so we're lucky, and learners and speakers are lucky that there's still, a relatively, what we think of in the Salish territory is a relatively large community of speakers, 30 to 40 fluent speakers. Speaking elders, and at this point, hundreds of learners, many very, very advanced second language learners, and also lots of opportunities for language learning, all the way from really early immersion languageness up into adulthood. The territories you can see on the map here. So this is Vancouver Island. Victoria is down here. And Halkanitan territory is the gray bit, so it extends along the east coast of Vancouver Island and the adjacent Gulf Islands. And you'll see throughout this presentation a few pictures here and there. So Halkanitan has a really, really rich consonant inventory in particular. The yellow boxes correspond to sounds which are not found in English, which is obviously the dominant language of the area, and the first language of many of the learners. It has a rich set of back sounds, velars and uvulars, both stops and fricatives. It has a really rich set of coronal fricatives and affricates, and it also has ejectives and plain stops, and in the resonant series it has plain resonance and also glottalized resonance. So there's a lot going on in terms of the sounds that learners need to learn. And on top of that, the language, partly because of the rich morphology, you can end up with consonants stacking up next to each other. So the word for lid, for example, is sort of typical of the kinds of consonant sequences you get, which are tricky to wrap with tongues around. You can try if you want. And then, of course, there are suprasegmental properties which are, different from English and also need to be learned. So we're going to be talking today mostly about the segmental level. This slide.
Okay, in terms of language learning and Indigenous language revitalization, it's important to remember that Indigenous people do not choose to lose their languages. Our languages, which is taken from us, is a very emotional topic created for many of based on a subconscious level. So we did choose to create these rich languages. Our people have had developed these rich languages and we understand the importance of them and how they represent our worldview. It's really difficult as a learner to have language loss. The language loss is perpetual and carries on in our communities with the loss of our languages. We have to acknowledge the shared history. At the same time, linguists were extracting knowledge, the knowledge from the speakers, children were being taken from their homes for these residential schools, and language transfer was often seen in Indigenous people. So that's a very important into the American Association for Evaluation. And I started doing some private work with language revitalization work. This has to be in a way that benefits and shields the language revitalization effort and acknowledges and honors the intergenerational colonization. The space is created needs to be made, acknowledging the systemic structure of language transition that brought indigenous people to where we are today in our civilization. And the huge work that comes along with that. So, as a language learner, I know the weight that we carry for language learning and survival. We carry that on our shoulders, and it's a very heavy weight to carry, and there's a lot of pressure. Learners and our mentors, our elders, we have very high standards when it comes to the creation of our language learning, because we need to convey the proper meaning. We need to honor our elders and to pass on the language that is spoken by and we really need to remember, and we do remember, that the logical pronunciation is a result of colonial history. Intelligibility and comprehensibility are not always as it may be in other language applications, like language applications. And at the same time, there are two learning that come from the intergenerational that we challenge every day.
So that context we'll come back to as we talk about the work that we've done here. This project was a SHRC-funded project through a partnership development grant, and it was on Community Phonetic Structures, Exploring Paths Towards Fluent Pronunciation. So it was a collaboration with Professor Sonya Bird at FSU, Community Elders, the Community Language and Culture Society, and Community Language Academy. And the goal, I mean, ultimately the goal is to support them and their pronunciation work. And so we've sort of been doing this with these three different steps, documenting the pronunciation speakers of different fluency levels, so adult learners in particular, compared to their mentors, their teachers and elders. And also working with elders and teachers and the learners themselves to identify the perceived challenges to pronunciation. And then based on that, creating pedagogical materials and tools to overcome these challenges. And then as sort of a part three, we're looking, we're as we go, assessing the usefulness of these materials and tools. And also I think, and this is what I was mentioning earlier, we'll be grateful for the opportunity to reflect on this work. I in particular, I feel like I can't speak for Rand, but have spent quite a bit of time kind of more recently really thinking about what it is that we've done and how we've done it in the best way possible and so on. Okay, so we're going to talk, as I mentioned, first about pronunciation and then about perception. So starting with pronunciation, we actually presented at last year's results conference a sort of big summary of overall patterns that we had noticed in learners based on a series of pronunciation tests that a whole whack of learners had taken over the years. We transcribed them, we pulled out patterns basically. That's what we did, and this is sort of a summary of last year's work. So I won't go into great detail here, but we did find that for one thing, learners were quite different in how consistent they were in the pronunciation strategies that they used. So some learners, every time they came across, a particular word that was difficult, they would adopt the same strategy to pronounce it. Other learners would vary more in the strategies they used for a given word or a given sound, maybe. Unfamiliar sounds are more successfully pronounced in familiar words than in unfamiliar words, and the more as sort of part, another piece of that that's actually not here is the the greater the number of unfamiliar sounds within a word, the more difficult pronunciation became kind of as a whole. So in a word that only had sh, maybe the sh was pronounced accurately, but in a word that had sh and also a bunch of other less familiar sounds, the sh's became more difficult. And then also another thing that seemed to be just a really consistent pattern, and that we've heard a lot from learners, is that reading is really difficult. So they're much more comfortable working with an elder, for example, and repeating words after an elder being big, and reading is hard to end up snapping over the words. In terms of sound replacements, you know, there were a lot of different voicing swaps, so planes pronounced as adductors, adductors as planes, place swaps, so LH and TH were often interchanged. Affricates sometimes pronounced as stops. You can see deletions, insertions, you know, things that you would expect. One thing that showed up that was quite interesting was that the ones in purple there are, so the word for cedar is fake, and a number of the learners turned the plain P into an ejected P, A. And that happened particularly at the beginning of words with different words, so there's sort of an overemphasis on the consonant, turning it into an ejective. And then it also happened a fair amount, and actually often with LH and TH, that even though, you know, S is a sound, so for sea lion, chase, S is a sound we have in English, right? It should be straightforward, but it's being replaced with a sh, which we don't have in English. And I think both of those things, you know, there's quite a literature, actually. There's not a huge literature on the phonetics of Indigenous languages, but there is among, you know, within that, there's literature on a sort of overemphasis of non-English properties of the language as identity markers instead of to mark social, you know, affiliation to a particular language group. Yeah. So those are some general patterns. In other work, we've also looked at the phonetics in a bit more detail. I'll play you a little bit later an example of one of the elders, Dolores, who's done a lot of work on the language. I'll play you an example of her TH. In Ho'oponopono, many of the elders pronounce this as a sort of a dental fricative. They're really this S sound rather than the stuff we have in English. And so that's somewhere where the learners seem to be more kind of consistent in their pronunciation and often have a TH that's more similar to the English. There's also interesting timing going on with diphthongs, where when you listen to elders, they have sort of equal timing between the two parts of the diphthong, whereas learners kind of smush up a little bit, they'll let the second part, so A versus ew. And then we've talked about it. But so we're just sort of exploring some of the phonetic patterns as well. And so having documented these patterns, then you know, the other thing that we've done a lot is used for doing sort of collaborative phonetic analysis, and we've used it a lot as a learning tool. I'll let Van talk about this, and I'll just say that you know, one of the things that came up in the plenary was the limitation of doing visualization work, because it is individual and you don't get to interact with the teacher necessarily. But in some cases, that actually takes pressure off the learners, right? And it can be a comfortable thing to do. So I'll let Rayanne talk about her experience with that.
Okay, I think I'm going to cover about what I've I have this past my find it, as Sonya had mentioned, that it takes the pressure off of learners, that it's something tangible. It takes them something tangible to work with, and unbiased feedback that they can visually see, that they can slow down to the speed that they need to, that they can zoom in to where they need to, that they can transmit between their elder speech and their speech. So, and also, we do not have, although we do have good teachers in our territory, many of our elder teachers are over 85 years old. So you can imagine the difficulty that when you have hundreds of language learners, how difficult it may be to sit down and practice your pronunciation with an elder. This provides a space for students to learn with a lot of students are very visually inclined in their learning, and I find that moving great tool to use and what I can use to address my own pronunciation and understand that I was maybe hopefully more complicated than it is. And one time, and also just being able to articulate sound. So I began using craft to adjust pronunciation of sound, and then I moved on to make intonation and pitch and storytelling, which it also provides me. It provides the opportunity to revisit our speech again and again without expecting the elders to repeat.
All right, so we have a couple of examples just to show you the kinds of things that we've used for. We've used different tools in our work. So we'll have that here, and then we'll talk a little bit about ultrasound and also a little bit about lithography. But PROT is particularly useful for things that are maybe difficult to see articulatorily, but show up quite well on a spectrogram. So this is an example of, I was telling you before about glotalized resonance. And it's from the word the soft spot on a baby's head, which has a glottalized L in the middle of it. And you can see when the elder pronounces it, you can see glottalization here. And you can see that it's missing from the learner's speech. And so this is, you don't have to have a lot of technical experience doing phonetic analysis to just see the differences, right? And glottalization is something that learners have a hard time with, hearing it, knowing where to put it, and so on. And so that has been really successful for that particular material, I would say. This is an example of vowel insertion. So the word is spana, with a KW followed by a TH. And, as many of us would do, this is a case where a learner has inserted a schwa in between the and the instead of kafana. And again, it's hard to hear sometimes, it's hard to sort of fix, but if you have this visual here that makes it really clear that it's there, you can work on kind of shrinking it until it's this one's sort of an interesting one. There's actually variation among elders as well, but at least for some elders, when you have labialized stops, there's no stop. So the labialization is on the K and it extends past it, but it's not before it at all. Whereas for many of the learners, you get out with the W jumping over to the vowel. And it's something else that you can see and you can point out to people, even if you don't know what formants are and you have no idea what the articulatory dynamic basis is for these things, you can point out that these lines are going down and these should be going down. So I guess in general, one more example. This is more of a rhythmic example. I mentioned before that diphthongs tend to be squished up a little bit for the learner. So this is an example, quail, where the three quail are about the same, they take up about the same timing. Whereas for the learner, the ends up being quite short. Quail almost sounding a little bit like the bird quail, rather than quail as a full 2 syllables. So we haven't done a lot with rhythm, but we've done a little bit. And it's somewhere again where you don't need to know a lot, right? To just kind of how the segmentation kind of lines up. So those are just a couple of examples of how we've used props, and again, we've used it for kind of specific types of contrast, specific types of sounds when they're easily accessible visually, which they're not all sounds are, right? So the other thing that we've done some playing with is ultrasound. So one of the sound contrasts that's really tricky for the learners is the viewer one, right? Cough versus cough. And that's one that's not easy to see acoustically necessarily. There are sound, there are audio and acoustic keys to it, but it's a little bit different to wrap your head, a little bit difficult to wrap your head around those sounds. So we've done quite a bit of playing. Marianne has been involved in this. And I'll just play you a video of Dolores, who is one of the elders who's worked a lot with the learners. She's pronouncing 4 different words that are minimal pairs, minimal quadruplets, I don't know. They're the same word except for the intervocalic consonant is either a KW, quack, or adjective KW, quack, or a QW, quack, or a QW adjective, quack. So you'll hear them and you'll see them. And I don't know how well you'll see the video, hopefully you'll see it. But she pronounces each word twice. And what you should kind of see is that the tongue sort of goes up and forward to the KW and up and back to the KW.
Mugwort. 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 Mugwort.
So it's a little hard just showing a video like this, but Lorianne, actually, maybe you can say a little bit just about the kind of passing back and forth activities that we've done and what you've seen and how they can be useful.
Yeah, it's very hard for learners to hear sound, and so seeing the movement of the tongue on the ultrasound was really helpful. Of course, as Sonya mentioned, the lower things easier to see. A lot of our elders, it was very difficult to see their tongue, so it was more of a challenge. But I found it very useful to have that visual representation in real time of what you were, the sounds that you're making, and being able to record and look back and review it, and the movement that the elders come to make really play they can play an important role in our mission, and what we need to do to exercise these muscles to be able to pronounce these sounds in the way that they are.
All right, so the last articulate learning strategy that we've used is static palatorography and midorography. So I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's relatively easy to do a really low-tech version of palatorography where you paint you create a charcoal and oil mix, and then you paint people's tongues and get them to say, ta, and then see where the charcoal has come off on the palate, and then you can do the opposite. You can paint the palate and get and see where the charcoal comes off on the tongue. And so we've done a couple of sessions like these, and I think for me at least, my sense is that the main thing that has come out of these sessions is a lot of laughter and a lot of kind of engagement with pronunciation just by having fun with it. So there's always, well, you can see, right, when you paint, you're painting each other's tongues and it tickles. And so that's me painting Rhiannon's tongue, and that's another of the, Rosie was another of the language learners that we, you know, that we both know well and worked a lot with. And so we actually have a whole sequence of palettography stills that we haven't really looked at extensively to kind of, you know, from a kind of research perspective to see exactly where the articulation is. But it's just, it's fun to do, which is at this particular session, I think we were trying it out on each other to see if it would be feasible to do with an elder. And I think, well, we never did do it with an elder. I think we just decided that it might be a bit much.
It's somewhat invasive. Having a mirror.
Oh yeah, that's not photographed, but you have to, if you're doing the color photography, you have to put a mirror in your map so that you can see what's happening with color. Okay, so the last thing, oh, actually, Rhiannon, I think you were going to talk about this one.
Yeah. So Sonya shared this checklist with me last week, and as I did check over, and then I have with complete the language academy, complete the language and cultural society, and the first thing that came to my mind is that I understand that this may be a useful checklist for somebody studying speech, but this is not a useful checklist for language reclamation. It points to a deficit model and does not, when you're working in language reclamation, one of the complex challenges that we face overcoming trauma of having our language taken away, what we fail to do can be detrimental to a learner's growth. And so I suggested to Sonya that this list includes everything, including their strengths. It really needs to highlight the strengths of pronunciation and be framed in a way that is going to uplift Indigenous language learners that are learning a very complex language. And so the tools that needed, that are needed, the work that are needed, the checklists that are needed, they all need to come from the scope of understanding that this is really heavy work that we go through. And many times, from my own experience, it can be defeating, and it can sometimes turn learners away to only highlight the evidence. So that's what I want to share about this slide. I'm not sure if you want to answer that question.
I think, well, let's just go, well, maybe I'll just say about this checklist is that it was one that was, we were asked to put it together. I don't know that it's being used with any of the learners. And, you know, I put it together without really thinking about it, but as soon as I showed it to Rhiannon, it was clear, you know, what Rhiannon just said was really, really clear. So it's sort of there, but I feel like it will need to be substantially changed. It might be a useful thing for teachers, you know, a list of things to look out for maybe, but not something to share with students.
I will, or maybe I will just respond to that right now. When you're self-constructed in an Indigenous community, if you are thinking, if you are processing your speech and analyzing it and not giving full disclosure, that may inhibit your future relationship with them. So that may not be the best.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah, for sure. The checklist was based on the general patterns yeah, anyway, there's tons
And
of
then
listening.
as the other models that are formed in a syllable process that have a scale of measurement and bringing it and it does not do this, not using those words, but more as not yet, not yet. Than just saying that we can't do it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so there's a whole, this is a huge topic, right, obviously, assessment and those kinds of things. You want to say anything about these things, Rhiannon? I feel like we've actually talked about some of them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I think that definitely within working in with policy and language revitalization, that focusing on patterns that are perceived by the learner is far greater value than focusing on things that you cannot that are harder to see. And we have just discussed how I felt the template testing was not appropriate. And balancing scholarly pressure with community-based work. We really need to think about what the tools and materials are being designed for, and if they're being designed for indigenous language reclamation, but having that as a focus and being sure to provide feedback in a timely manner that is going to support the indigenous students and looking at it more as just a topic that can be presented with a field, less of a topic that can be presented as a field and more of a topic that can serve a very greatly needed spot in real people's lives.
So that's advocacy we need to do with academia, both for Rhiannon and Ray as a PhD student. For me as well, you know, there were the evaluation processes involved in being an academic. Okay, so I just got the 10-minute warning. Maybe we'll go, and I want to make sure we have time for kind of some general discussion. So I'll move quite quickly through the listening quiz, the listening practice quizzes that we put together, but I'm happy to sit with anyone kind of after and talk about them in more detail. Basically, the rationale for them was that perception training, pronunciation. And so we created a whole series of listening quizzes based on recordings of elders reading word lists and things, and we designed them in JSite, which lets us kind of pull the data off the back end so that we can share with the students how they're doing on the quizzes, how they're progressing over time, and so on, and also so that we can kind of see what general patterns emerge that we're hearing as LTR. And so we have lots and lots of quizzes at this point that are up. The boxes kind of right now they're organized into modules which correspond to kind of sets of sounds. We have quizzes for the back sounds and quizzes for the carnal affiliates and so on. And we're just doing a little bit of rebundling and reformatting, which I won't go into. Basically, the way the quizzes work is the students can enter their names, and then that lets us provide them with feedback. There's a tip slide which tells them kind of what to listen for in trying to hear a contrast. There's 15 to 20 questions which are sort of forced choice, basically. Do you hear this sound or do you hear that sound? And then the quiz ends. Each quiz ends with a fact slide which provides a bit of extra information on word contrasts. And then at the end, they get the total number, they basically get their score, like how many questions they were in the test, how many right answers. But so I won't show you the quizzes. As I said, I'm happy to talk through them after. I'll just show you a little bit. So one of the things that we've been able to pull from these is just, you know, general patterns of things that are hard, things that are easy. And so I'll show you actually a couple of things. So among the back sounds, one thing that's sort of notable is that the KQ contrast. So this is, all of these graphs have scores out of 100, and then the different quizzes within a particular module. So you can see that the KQ quiz was relatively, relatively easy, whereas some of the other ones were harder. One of the things about K and Pokemon is you only get it in borrowed ones. And so if you know that, if you recognize that a word kind of looks a little bit like an English word, you can use that knowledge, right, to help with it. And then the other graph down there is on glottal stops. The words can end with a vowel, or they can end with all kinds of things, but there's a contrast between vowel final words and words that have a vowel plus a glottal at the end. So versus and that is particularly challenging for the learners to listen. So you kind of have to listen almost past the vowel to hear the glottal stop. And the other thing that it shows us is things that are easy. So across the board, learners do really well with the front fricatives, which for me, as someone who hasn't grown up with polyphonic exposure, I always find this surprising. The TH and the S in particular are quite, to me, are quite similar. So here's an S.
Hasten.
And here's the TH.
Samson.
It's quite different from the English TH, right? Here's a word that has both, dear.
Sminius.
Where you can hear the contrast within the word. But this is one that I really struggled with. So it was really cool actually to see that the Hokkien learners don't really have trouble with this. So sometimes we see, we just see where it's good, where it's not so good. And that helps us to continue to design quizzes that focus on sounds and so on, right? So this is something again that we created. These are individual reports, and I've just got them up here. We haven't given these to the students, and based on discussions with me and Brianne, and also talking to them with Dolores, we won't give them to students. What we'll give them is just here's what you're really great at. Here's some things to keep practicing. So it's up here just to show you that we make mistakes, right? Like as someone who is a linguist and not a community member and not embedded in this context, it's easy to make mistakes. These kinds of reports are some.
So looking at the assessment of methods, just reflecting on them, we talked about the contributions of hopefully numbers, realization, and document learning patterns is only useful environment. And I can only speak to my personal experience. There is not any feedback, although I know my speech has been documented in 2018 and in 2020 and again in 2022 to finally learn that it had not been analyzed. So I understand that it is complex work, but it has to be the feeling of that is giving that power to students, and that's kind of what I did. I wasn't able to use the tools that taught me to study my own information and make my own work, whether that is whether I know the problem or not is one thing, but it's really needs to be promoted in language revitalization and regulation that feedback be given that can be used, and honoring the generational colonialism, providing feedback in the appropriate, cultural appropriate way, and focusing on the strength. And I know like Steve DeMont, who I work with quite closely, has always taught me some great tools for pronunciation, focusing on my own strengths and reinforcing that I just need to be practicing with that strength-based focus. How does our work help? Documentation of relative patterns help they are helpful for focusing tools and methods on specific features that are challenging for learners. The reality is, like, when it comes to these tools and methods, they are important. There are not enough elders supporting guide us with the work that we need to do. And we need to understand that we don't have the same input that we would have had in previous generations. And we need to recreate that as best as we can, and we do that through audio files. We need to make use of all of those recordings from our first language speakers. And assessment tools and methods, audio recordings allow us becoming aware of the variation across speakers, and also understanding that carefully speech that we are more accustomed to in institutional settings is not the speech that is articulated here. So that is something to also take into consideration in your educational work. The vast variation in the community. Seeing speech in fun, including some stress, seeking and listening activities for life practice that can be incorporated in a more holistic approach. So, learning from the community experience, learning what we've done, we've learned that language works must acknowledge that historical, the history of harvesting language by the fields of linguistics at a time when we were not allowed to transfer language to our own children. This was cultural genocide that intentionally impacted, really impacted our people. And in the space of acknowledgement, that's where trust can be built, and that's where people can be open to move forward. Indigenous communities need to directly benefit from all work that is done on our language. We need to prioritize sharing findings with learners and with teachers, because the bottom line is that following conversation will not rely on language. If they could, our languages would be revitalized based on the amount of work that has been done, and invaluable work, but the focus needs to change. We need to honor language that is separable from culture and from land, and focus on pedagogical approaches that are trauma informed and that address the barriers that learners face. We need to raise up learners and acknowledge that for generations we were punished for opening our mouths and speaking. And we carry language learners now carry the weight of loss. We are in a constant cycle as we carry our mentors, and we have great huge revival work on our shoulders. So feedback needs to be framed in a way that does not add more. So relationality is very important in decolonizing linguistics, understanding that we cannot disconnect the science from the people. We cannot disconnect the study of people from the people. We need to integrate the two and work with respect, reciprocity, responsibility, and research. We need to be accessible and be aligned with the interests and the rights of contributors of each community should take precedence over scientific interests. So our take home from our second language acquisition and all of this work here is that working in indigenous language provided a context that intergenerational colonization and language loss break it down. Indigenous worldview and approaches are relevant. Relationships are at the forefront in our community, and language is inseparable from, again, culture in finding things to share. This approach should be the norm in the field more generally, and we can register it and work on rehumanizing our field and using what we said, how we study, and produce benefits. And then the thing, I really hope that that message is brought across for each benefit.
So maybe I'll just add just a couple of things to this and we'll wrap up, I guess. Just on this kind of last slide and last point, the thing that I think about always when I'm at this conference, reading papers and so on, is one of the things that I think about is sort of, you know, the design of learning more about learners and their characteristics and how that affects the abilities to learn and so on, and also learning more about the pedagogical aspects of the work. And you know, I guess this is a conversation that Rachel and I have had, Barb and I have had as well, about centering the learners in the work that we do and making sure that everything we do, you know, we've learned. I feel like I have learned so much from working with Ryan and working with the whole nation in this area about just making sure that everything that we do, we keep in mind that the learners are real people and they should be at the center of all the work that we do. And I think that's true in general, right? And so continuing to think about, for every research project, for example, how does this relate to real people and their learning experiences, and how can we immediately bring it back to the learners? I think it'll continue to, I feel like research is kind of shifting in that direction in general, partly because some of the reasons require us to be accountable now in a way that is really clear. But it's something, I have just an example here because I was thinking about this yesterday when Shannon was presenting the workshop on experimental design about problematizing this notion of native speaker, right, is something that it's good to think about, right? And in this particular context, Rand and I were talking about this last night, speakers will not call themselves fluent. They're sort of a bit of a, they'll always defer to someone else who is more knowledgeable, better, knows more people, and so on, right? And so, you know, I was really interested to read about this problem that we have in trying to define these speakers and as well, right? So there's all kinds of things that we can talk about methodologically in terms of the ways that we go about acquiring knowledge and what we do with it and how we interpret it and so on, that I would love to chat more about, but I think we're out of time. So
we do have one more question.
Yes.
We thought we had the picture of Early George at the beginning, and I just want to share how much pride have instilled in our language learners. Just asking Rosie to share, if we can share her photo. She shared, you know, on social media how proud she was of the work that she had done years ago in language was being shared in Ontario, which is really honored that the picture of the song was shared. Makes a difference.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Rand, can you?
Thanks,
Well, I just want to thank on behalf of the audience, Ryan and Sonya, for a very thoughtful talk, and it reminds us all of the importance of the learners and the importance of focusing on what their strengths are and encouraging them to continue on their path. So thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.